Melanin Brown Discovers America is a middle grade book about a seventh grade African-American girl who witnesses a new student being bullied because he doesn't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. This makes her feel uncomfortable and she knows the bullying is wrong, but she doesn't quite know how to navigate that space. Like, what should she do? How far should she push? What does that look like? And so through guidance that she receives from her parents, as well as experiences that she has in school with her friends and other peers, she kind of comes into a voice of her own and discovers herself, as well as a couple other things along the way.
Hey, welcome back to Normalize The Conversation. Today I'm here with Candice Davis. Candice is a middle school special education teacher in Washington, D.C. with a background in film. Candice started her career in education as a curriculum and personnel specialist, writing grants and proposals. Due to her desire to have a more direct impact with disadvantaged students, she transitioned into teaching. Melanin Brown Discovers America is Candice's debut book. She holds a Master's of Education in Educational Psychology with a focus in social foundations from the University of Virginia and a Bachelor's in Film and Video Studies from George Mason University. Candice, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you really?
I am amazing. Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. I'm like, oh, I feel special.
You are special. Let's talk about your book, first of all, because I learned so much. I grew up in a very privileged background. I went to private Catholic school my whole life. So as I got older, probably in the college, I started learning about different social issues that no one had ever talked to me about before. And I didn't understand. And no matter how much research I did, without having personal accounts and firsthand experience, it's really hard to understand. But in this book, you did such an amazing job going through the social issues in a way that makes sense, that helps you understand and feel kind of connected to the character. So thank you so much for creating this book. And I would love it if you could share a short summary on what the book is about.
Yes, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That was definitely my goal, to have those type of feelings and reactions from the reader. So I appreciate hearing your feedback about it. So Melanin Brown Discovers America is a middle grade book about a seventh grade African-American girl who witnesses a new student being bullied because he doesn't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. This makes her feel uncomfortable and she knows the bullying is wrong, but she doesn't quite know how to navigate that space. Like, what should she do? How far should she push? What does that look like? And so through guidance that she receives from her parents, as well as experiences that she has in school with her friends and other peers, she kind of comes into a voice of her own and discovers herself, as well as a couple other things along the way.
It is a truly amazing story. And I love how you touched on a young Black woman discovering this different idea where someone doesn't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. And that can be really off-putting if you don't understand why and if you don't know. And people, especially kids, they're so easy to bully. They're so easy to make fun of someone for being different, for standing up for what they believe in. So in the book, Melanin actually goes up to the kid after talking with her father and asks why and learns and has a conversation instead of just judging, which was absolutely incredible. What inspired you to write this book?
It was really my experiences that I had as an educator, what I saw in the school environment. So I would see how children were coming into the school environment with various backgrounds, different experiences, and they would bring that into our school community. And it would highly impact how they interacted with one another, what ultimately impacted their access to the education. And as an educator, certain things, is red tape. Like, we shouldn't touch certain things. We shouldn't talk about certain things. And then certain things are in a gray area. We can touch on it, but we can't really give our opinions. We can't really dive in deeper. And so I saw how kids at a very young age would come into school, and obviously from their experiences, what they were hearing outside of the school from either parents, on TV, social media, and they would have certain opinions about people, about and a lot of it, some of it was political views, some of it was based on, race. And it could be really young, like 3, 4, 5. It starts at an early age, to be honest. And sometimes it seemed like they would have opinions, but it wasn't really based in anything. It's obviously from what they've heard or what they've seen. And then they would treat someone a certain way based on what they've seen, of what they've heard. And so that really inspired me to want to write a book that touched on various social issues as an entryway of having conversations. And my goal was that it could be differentiated. So it could be introduced to younger ages and kind of just like introduce the topics around like prejudice, race, bullying, patriotism. And for older students, that you could really dive in a bit deeper and really figure out why these social constructs exist. So my hope is that it would like resonate really with anyone of any age.
And you did a fabulous job creating that. And one thing that really stood out to me were the way you presented the social issues, because you didn't just come out and say, this is a problem in America. You didn't force it in a way. I think one of the biggest problems with conversations today is everyone wants to force their opinion into an argument instead of stating a fact, sharing a story of what's actually happening and how people are reacting, and people of different genders, different races. It's not just one. And we don't have conversations. And like you said, social media is where we learn so much, and from our parents and from our teachers, and we don't know why we believe things. So I was taught to believe a certain way without understanding why someone might make a different choice. And not to go political into it, but I wasn't given a chance to make my own decision. And I think that's something that happens in so many different ways, is we're not giving a chance to create our own opinion, to create our own values. We're kind of told what to believe and told what to think, and there's no why. And if there's no why and there's no understanding, nothing is going to change. Nothing good is going to come out of it, because you don't know what you're fighting for and you don't know why you're fighting for it. So I really want to talk about all these different social issues that you mentioned in the book. So I'm going to share different social issues, and I would love for you to talk about why it was important to you to get the youth involved in these conversations. Mm-hmm. So first, let's talk about the name of the school that Melanin attends. In the book, you shared that the name was Shirley Chisholm Preparatory Middle School, but formerly known as Robert E. Lee Middle School. So for those who don't know, Robert E. Lee was a Confederate general during the Civil War. And in the Civil War, the South was the Confederacy, and they wanted to succeed the Union because they wanted to abolish a federal law that was preventing them from expanding slavery into the West. Shirley Chisholm, on the other hand, is Fighting Shirley, the first African-American woman elected to Congress and to seek a nomination for the presidency. She was a real catalyst my light just popped, was a real catalyst for change in racial and gender equality. So I would love to learn more about why you decided to talk about the name change and why you picked the specific change.
Yes, so it was definitely something that was purposeful, because one, I saw that it was starting to happen in certain places, like in certain areas, taking down certain statues. And, a couple years back, like the whole issue at UVA, with taking down certain things and people being so outraged. And I really just wanted to highlight that, to kind of like introduce it so we could touch on why. So I wanted that to be another, a light entry point, just by like noting that it was happening, to hopefully be able to have a conversation like, why did that happen? Why did that occur? And it is like, as you said, like, if we're really thinking about like a country that is supposed to be for everyone's, a country that everyone is supposed to have like equality, fair access, then if everyone is not receiving it, if everyone does not have access to that, everyone is not granted that, then it negates the point. It's not true. It's not factual. So the standards of what the country was built on never really applied to everybody. And we can see how, like, over a century later, remnants of that, how that it still impacts society, especially for Black Americans. So I really wanted to touch on that and to like change the name of because there was a school near me that not with that name but had Robert E. Lee's name in it, and they changed it to a different name. And I wanted to make sure that I picked a strong figure, and I was like, what better figure than the first African American woman who actually ran for presidency.
It's funny because the names on buildings and the statues we see are supposed to be a symbol of who we should look up to. And yet we are taught to look up to people who we don't know the background and the history and all the bad things that they actually did. And although Robert E. Lee was celebrated as a good general, that didn't make him a good person with a good moral compass. And there is a difference. And we need to start seeing the line of morals and values, and not just they were a fierce general, they were outspoken, they were strong in a certain way. That doesn't, but if their beliefs of what they were strong for and what they were pushing for isn't right, that's not something we should be celebrating.
100%, especially if like what they were pushing for was to oppress people. So it's like, and that's some of what has been, I feel like, wrong with American like history and like what has been taught in schools, and why I do believe CRT is important. Because like you said, kids are being told who to look up to, and it's students of all races. So as I was growing up, being a young Black girl, I'm also receiving this information to look up to someone who didn't want me to have access, who wouldn't have wanted me to be in a class setting with people of all races, who didn't want me to have equality. So I'm over here supposed to idolize someone who was fighting against my rights. And so that's why it's so important to know the why behind something. If kids are being told something, like, they shouldn't just be told something, they should be a part of a conversation. And that's why like writing the book was so important to me, because I also saw that. I experienced that when I was growing up in school. And I do feel like schooling has taken a shift. And things are starting to get better, but there's so much work to be done. And part of that is not just telling kids what they should do, but having them be a part of the conversation, because they are humans, they have voices, they have feelings, and they should be, by allowing them to be a part of the conversation, they're able to start to think critically about some of these things, and then they can actually be active citizens in society and not wait until they're adults and now their challenges and their beliefs are being challenged. And now it's this whole thing of like having to backtrack and having to rethink and mend and change like a mindset.
Exactly. And it causes an identity crisis when later on you have all these beliefs, but no values behind them, no understanding behind them, no ability to have a conversation, and people start to challenge you and you don't know what to do. You no longer know what you believe in or why you believe in anything. And that leads to feelings of anxiety, feelings of depression, mental health symptoms, of fatigue, burnout, so many things you'll experience by just never learning and giving the opportunity to learn and explore yourself and make choices for what you believe in and be part of a conversation. I really want to jump in chapter 3. That's when the new student Michael is introduced to the story. And in the morning, like we said earlier, the entire class stands for the Pledge of Allegiance while Michael stays seated with his head down. It is later revealed that Michael stays seated for spiritual reasons. But in the beginning, like we said, he is bullied. So why did you choose to mention it and wait all the way towards the end to give us why?
I wanted the reader to experience what the character was experiencing. So the experience, what Michael's experiencing, and to go along that journey of Melanin's, of how she perceives certain things and how she reaches her point of change for her, of realization, of being enlightened, and how that impacts her. So I wanted to wait until the end to reveal that, because I wanted everyone to be wondering, to have that question until the end, and for them to ultimately realize that that question is irrelevant. Why someone chooses to not stand for the pledge or chooses not to do something doesn't mean that their rights as a human should now be violated or void, because that's irrelevant. That question, it's irrelevant. And I was hoping that the reader would get to that point by the end.
Yes. And you see how much he is bullied for it. And there's no why he's being bullied. There's no substance behind him being bullied. There's this character named Carl. And this is a huge theme in the book, is his bullying. And he's endlessly teasing every character, but specifically with Michael, he doesn't give him a break. He doesn't ask why he's not standing. He doesn't give him a chance to talk, but even Michael doesn't feel like he needs to explain himself, which is correct. He doesn't need to explain himself. But we're just so focused in on how Carl is attacking, and everyone around him is laughing and agreeing. And it's not until Melanin's father talks to her and talks about the First Amendment and how you have a right, as long as you do it peacefully, you have a right to stand up for what you believe in. When you were writing that part of the story in the First Amendment, what inspired you to take that approach and using the First Amendment as kind of like evidence for why you have the ability to stand up and to speak up?
Well, I definitely wanted to touch on like constitutional rights. One, because they weren't always granted to everyone. And two, if we're saying that, we're still upholding these rights, then they should apply. Something that I've seen, especially in society, when someone's trying to argue their point, they will, state certain facts, or they would say like, oh, this is unpatriotic. This is, you're not being, I'm sure they will say that it's unpatriotic, right? However, if you really look at it, it's like, what's more patriotic than actually following what is stated, what is granted, what is said? Like, you can't take parts of, the Constitution and be like, oh, this, well, you can, but as far as like, if you're going to state one thing, then it should make sense. So a lot of times I would see contradictions, like when I listen sometimes to newscasts or people talking and they're trying to argue a point for why they believe certain things should still be upheld or people shouldn't have access to things, even though it's not said in that way, it's always cleverly disguised. But that's pretty much what is happening. And I would see sometimes people arguing certain points, like with Colin Kaepernick, so much. He had to endure so much. And he was another person that inspiration for the book, inspiration for Michael and him not standing, is seeing the experience that Colin Kaepernick went through for taking a knee. He didn't say anything disrespectful. He was literally just taking a knee because he felt like he couldn't, stand for national anthem. I'm singing about the Star Spangled Banner because he didn't feel like those rights were like it applied to everyone. Not everyone had access to that. And so he kneeled to bring awareness to that, but he got attacked. His job was in jeopardy because of that. However, again, he was doing so respectfully. He didn't try to discourage people who still wanted to stand. He just chose for himself, for his voice. He didn't feel like it was right. And so he knelt. And so I wanted that inspiration as well to the character Michael, and to wanting to have the conversation with about the First Amendment and for that to come from Melanin's dad. It's multifold there. One, I wanted to showcase a strong African-American male father figure being involved in his kid's life. I feel sometimes that's often not showcased. And because we know historically, the things were set into place to break up the African-American home, to jail African-American males. And then, African-American women had to become like the leader of the household. And, there was so much that went on with that. So it was really important for me to showcase a strong family with a mother figure and a father figure in Melanin's life, and how both of them really add to the value. Both of them really add to her insight and really help her discover herself, help her find her voice, not by telling her what she should do, but helping guide her so she can get to that point on her own. And so that part was really important to me to have that conversation to come from her dad, but also because of later revealed what he does and how that impacts him, but how he's seen in society, but what he still does for society, what he still does for the country.
I really love that you took the direction of creating that family figure, because in the media, we tend to have the African-American father absent, and we don't often get to see it as a family and show that exists, first of all, that it exists. And that's something that is so silly that you wouldn't even realize what the media is teaching us. But I really want to bring up how you talked about that really isn't always the case. There was in chapter 10, we find out that Michael lost his father in a motorcycle accident. His father was hit by a police officer and it was ruled an accident. And that was so important. First of all, police violence is one of the leading causes of death of all young men, but number 6 for Black men specifically. Black men have a 1 in 1,000 chance of being killed by a police officer.
Insane.
Yeah. And that is something that we kind of ignore. I mean, the whole BLM and then turning into All Lives Matter was so ridiculous, because you want to pull out facts all the time, and then when it's important, you don't want to look at the statistics. You don't want to talk about it. And it's so important that we do. But why was this piece very important for you to include in the book?
Well, one, I wanted to point out how the African-American experience is not monolithic. So being African-American, depending on where you're raised, your background, your experiences, all of that shapes you. So being Black, there's not just one experience of being Black in America. However, the one thing that kind of is always true is being Black in America. So sometimes you could be a celebrity, or, you could like live in a neighborhood that doesn't like have the best, access to education or, equity, especially when it comes to, economics with the economy. However, I wanted to bring that up to kind of point out that is still something that is an issue that every Black person, I feel like, has a fear of, especially a Black parent has worried about or had to have that conversation with, their kids about possibly, or this is how you should act, regardless of status. It's literally based on skin color. So it was really important for me to tie in that piece, but I wanted to do it in a different way. I wanted to address the situation in a different way than what some might have thought that I would have, like how I would have addressed it. But it was really important for me to add that piece in, because I feel like that is one similarity that all Black people have in America, is that they're Black in America.
It was a very powerful piece to add in. And I really want to talk about the mental health aspect of having to have that conversation, of having that fear, of growing up with that fear, how do you think that really impacts mental health and gives an unfair advantage to people based on their skin color?
It's definitely traumatizing, and it's generational trauma that occurs from that, and we've seen it. And something that really stood out to me recently, that I believe a post from Sandra Bullock, that she was on the Red Table Talk, and she was talking about raising her Black son, her adopted son in America. And one, like, I love Sandra Bullock. I admire her so much. Just how, like, she presents herself, how she moves through society, what she does, her advocating, her impact. I feel like she definitely uses her celebrity, her status, in a very positive way to shed light. And I love that conversation so much, because when it's about, like, my goal, like, having conversations are so important. Like, we have to address the issues, we have to converse about them to even start to get towards change. And she is talking about her experience being a mother raising a Black boy. However, she is white. So she was talking about how, she's fearful as well, but she tries to have these open and honest conversations with him. And there was one part that I know was put up on Instagram that Viola Davis highlighted. And she was talking about how, like, he put on a hoodie one time and he was 6 years old, and she had to have the conversation with him. And that was just so powerful, because she talked about how, like, she's fearful for him, that, once he gets older, he's going to be perceived in a certain light, because, Black men are demonized in society. And so she has these conversations with him. And, she says sometimes, like, yeah, people are scared, sometimes when you go out, so you shouldn't do that. And Tamika DeMallory, who is amazing, an activist. I'm like, it's Angela. She's like Angela Davis, right? The Angela Davis of today's era. And she commented, and she replied to the post, and she started with pretty much saying she hates to be that person that kind of points out a small nuance or an issue when something's being celebrated, because they were like, Sandra Bullock, like, everyone's celebrating her because she did an amazing job, like, I think, bringing awareness to it, but also talking about her unique experience and how that impacts it, and just another celebrity being able to use their platform in a positive light. And Tamika said there was one thing that she wanted to correct. And I really, it really resonated with me, because she pointed out that Sandra said something about how, in the conversation with her son, she said, because people are scared. And she was just pointing out that when we have conversations with the youth, especially with Black boys, Black girls, we have to be very careful about how we address certain things, because it impacts their mental health. She was like, he can perceive that as saying that you are scary, and almost justifying sometimes how the treatment of him, and that can be damaging. And she was saying she's sure that obviously it wasn't meant that way, and it could have been an error of her speaking. However, other people watching it may use her post as the platform of, like, oh, this is a conversation I'm going to have with my kids, and this is what I'm going to tell them. So she felt like it was important just to highlight that little difference, that little part that can make a huge difference, because instead of saying that, people are scared, address how some people are scared because that is rooted in racism, that is rooted in people's biases, and them being scared is tied back to how Black people are portrayed, and that's the issue. So tie it back to the culprit, the issue, and by just tweaking it that little bit and rewording it can make a huge difference, because that will impact someone's mental health if they grow up saying, like, oh, they're scared of me because I'm scary, versus like, they're scared of me because I've been portrayed in society and demonized. And that is the issue, not me. And I just felt like, wow, that was so powerful. Just seeing like someone like, oh, this is a powerful conversation, it's important. And then someone still adding to it. And I feel like that's what's necessary. A lot of people were like, yes, Tamika, we agree. There were some people who were like, oh, he's only 6. He's young. There's still time for that. And she's like, no, it starts early. And that's so true. The conversation starts early because it impacts them now. It impacts them at 5, 6. And we've seen that in Brown versus Board of Education with the doll test. Like those kids were early elementary age. And I love how Tamika addressed it in a respectful way. She acknowledged like she loved, what Sandra, was doing. She's inspired by her, and she was just addressed that one piece. And I think that is important because when we're having conversations like this, of course, it's going to be uncomfortable at first, but it's also important to be able to address some things that we see that could be an issue so that it doesn't happen. And Sandra loves her kids. I've seen her talk about her kids. I've seen her talk so much about what she does to make sure that they are informed and they are enlightened and knowledgeable, and how she tries to spread that out, to other people as well. So I felt like it would be like, I'm sure that's maybe something that she just didn't hear. And by Tamika just kindly mentioning that, she now has that insight, and now she can like think on it and be like, oh, you know what, that makes a good point. And that's what conversation should be like when we're talking about this. We should be able to talk to one another, address when we see some issues respectfully, so we can really reflect on it and take it in, and then see, oh, I can see how this can be an issue. And just by making this small change, it can have a huge difference, especially on the mental health of Black youth when they're hearing some of these things that they're living and having to experience.
Yes, clear communication is key, explaining why. And that goes into the whole purpose of your book, like you said, is explaining why, getting kids involved in the conversation. And we don't know what we don't know. So if we're not having these conversations, we wouldn't learn. If it was not added into the conversation, no one would know. No one would be aware that it could be misinterpreted. Even though that wasn't the intent, it can still be taken differently. It's not everything, because your intentions can be so good and so pure. But if someone else receives it in a bad way, it was still received in a bad way. And we need to make change. Right. And we can't do that without learning. Yes. The conversation is key. And getting kids to be part of it at a young age, 6 years old, having to have that conversation about the hoodie, that is heartbreaking. But it's also amazing to see that we are now having these conversations young, and we're not waiting until something happens. Because that has been the history, is waiting and being reactive instead of preventative, and giving kids the opportunity to learn that this is a problem. This is a huge problem, but it doesn't have to be. We can make change. We can be part of the conversation. You have a voice, which is something we never gave before.
100%.
So, in your book, you also bring up a really important topic of Carl as the bully, and how there are two actually amazing topics you brought up with this. One being how his father talks to him and treats him and essentially bullies him and makes him feel worthless, which he now uses to make other people feel worthless. But it is also found out that he gets away with being a bully because his parents are big donors to the school, and they threaten pulling their financial assistance from the school if their kid gets in trouble. So now the father is not only teaching the kid to be a bully, he is also making it like it's normal and it's okay, and encouraging it.
Yes.
So when you brought up that point in the book, what made you bring up the background, his father, first of all?
Mm-hmm. Well, oftentimes a bully had been bullied. A lot of times a bully, something has happened to them. There's some type of experience. There's a why for someone being a bully. The hard part is knowing the why, right? A lot of times it's because of their experiences. They're experiencing certain things have been normalized. And by seeing how Carl's father interacts with them, seeing how Carl's father is a bully, apple and tree, like his experiences of him being bullied is what he goes out and he puts out into the world now. And that's so important because that addresses more than just being a bully, but addresses a lot of the social issues that we see. Like certain things are passed down generationally from parent to child, and ignorance is passed down as well. And it's not until someone becomes an adult sometimes and they experience other people and be like, oh, well, what I learned, that's not what I'm experiencing, especially if they, become friends with someone who's a different race or has a different background, different experiences, but different beliefs, right? And I wanted to really highlight like the impact that the household has on a child as well. There's multiple factors, but 100% the household definitely has a huge impact on someone's upbringing, how they view the world. That's their first experience being in the house, learning from the parents. The parents are the first teachers. And I also wanted to show like that, to touch on that mental health piece about how Carl's experience of being bullied, he clearly feels inferior. He doesn't feel good about himself because of his father. And so now he takes that and he now puts it out and projects it onto other people for their experience. And that is also a little bit of how he feels like he's getting his power. So he's going about it in a really negative way because he doesn't know, like he doesn't know any better. And obviously as he's getting older, he knows what he's doing is wrong. Carl is well aware of that. But because his dad does it, he feels like it's justified.
Yes. When we talk about bullies, we often talk about how bad they are, how their actions are bad, but we never really talk about where it comes from. And that is such a key point, because if we know where it comes from, we know how to change it. We know where the problem is. When it comes to problems in general, and the problems in this country, we tend to focus on the result and not on the cause. We look at the effect all the time. And it is important to look at the effect. But if we don't know the cause, we can't make change, because if the cause isn't changing, nothing is going to be able to change. You can't come up with a solution without knowing the cause. And that was so powerful that you brought it up. But another aspect I loved, going back to how his parents threatened to pull the funding if he got in trouble. We talk about privilege a lot in this country recently. But financial privilege is a big key that we don't talk about, because there is a privilege based on your skin color. But there's another added advantage when you come from wealth, when you come from money, when you feel that you can buy your way into things and you can buy an abuse of power. So what inspired you to take that perspective and add that piece in?
Honestly, what I was seeing in politics, I felt like, especially in these past couple of years, we have really seen how someone who's privileged because of their skin color, because of their gender, and because of their financial wellness has been able to buy that abuse of power without consequence. Just outwardly, everyone is seeing, everyone is witnessing certain things happening without consequence. And so that is giving the message that is okay when it comes from someone like that. And it's also giving the message that there's nothing you can do about it. And that's something that has really impacted me the past couple of years. And I went through a phase of being a bit cynical with like society and just like, I hope better. Like, what are we doing? And like just this question of like, why is this still happening when it's so obvious? Like, and then seeing how like some people will still blatantly deny things that are fact. And that really inspired me for that piece to highlight that, because it's definitely something that needs to be addressed, and it's definitely something that needs to change.
It is so important to highlight it because, again, it is being done so openly with no accountability, with no understanding of why it's wrong. And when you see leaders and public figures and people that you are supposed to look up to or that you look up to doing this, it normalizes it. It normalizes it. So how do you expect the next generation to grow up? We are raising the next generation to be just as ignorant by not questioning it, by not talking about it, by not explaining why it's bad. They may be getting away with it today, and there may be nothing we can do about right this second, but we can change the next second. We can change tomorrow. And if we don't talk about it, if you didn't talk about it in this book, if we didn't have these conversations with kids, they would think that we're stuck in this minute forever and that this is how it is. And there is nothing that they can do to change it. But
I love what you said, that we may not be able to change this second, but we can surely change that next second. I love that so much.
It is so important that we're teaching kids this. And then in the middle of the book, it was chapter 7. The class visited the African American History Museum. What I loved about this chapter so much was that you talk about it from the beginning in America, right? The beginning of slavery, the era of segregation, the Civil War. But then you go into women in power, Black feminism, the Black Power movement, Martin Luther King Jr.'s role in the civil rights, President Barack Obama being elected. We tend to focus so much on the past and not looking at the progress, because progress is where hope comes in. We have to be offering hope that things are changing because people are standing up, because these conversations are being had. And I thought that was such a unique perspective, bringing in not just the past and not just the future, acknowledging all of it, where we were, how far we've come, how little we've come as well, and showing all of it. So what inspired you to really take that approach?
It was really important for me to highlight, as you said, like the past, the impact that had on, our present, and then what that can mean for our future. And 100% that there's progress that has been made, and that hope is so important, because that is what keeps people fighting for progress, keeps people knowing that change is possible. It takes work. It takes work, but it is possible. And it was extremely important for me to highlight that, for the youth to know that activism is important, their voice is important, and it does work. The consistency with that does work. And we can see how changes have happened because of our activists in the past, activists who risk their livelihood, risk their lives, so that, current day, we have access to things that we used to not. And so I wanted to highlight how much has changed, even though we can look back and see how much hasn't, but to take that chapter and just focus on the change that has happened, it really does give hope of what else can occur when we acknowledge the issue and pain that has happened. We acknowledge the social constructs that have been put in place. We have conversations about it. And then what can happen when we address the change that needs to occur so that we can redress that issue. And so that chapter, it's my favorite chapter. It definitely meant a lot to me. It's also the longest chapter, in the book. I wanted to make sure the book was accessible. And that chapter I purposely picked to be the longest chapter because it was something that I felt like needed to be longer, if anyone if you've been to the African American History Museum, I wanted the experience that Melanin has there to be factual. So if you go to the African American History Museum, you go to that section, you get in the elevator, it was extremely important that her account of what she saw was exactly how it was. So I've been there multiple times, had my notes, made sure. I even had to like contact the African American History Museum to get approval to use actual quotes that were there. So the things that she's seeing, that she's like recognizing, are actually there at the African History Museum. Her experience of like progression actually is what someone will experience, a reader, if they go to the African American History Museum. And some of the quotes that she noted are actually there posted on the wall. So that was extremely important for me to have it be that way.
I really love that you put that much detail into it, because for someone who hasn't been there, it gives them an idea of what an experience could be like. But for someone who has been there or who goes there afterwards, they can relate to her experience. They can experience it not just with her and through her eyes or alongside her. They can understand what spoke to her and what speaks to them. Why is it different? Why is it the same? Where those unique pieces are. It gives people the chance to learn another perspective, someone else's ideas, get in someone else's head. And that is where we can start to have conversations. Like we mentioned early in the beginning, is we tend to go straight to arguing. We tend to go straight to our side is right. And that is something we are innately taught in schools, because you're taught to be right. Your teachers call on you, ask you to answer questions. You get it wrong, you feel embarrassed. So you always have to be right. And then you go to have conversations and you don't care what the other person's perspective is. You don't know. You don't even know your own perspective, truly. You're just so into knowing it all that you never get the chance to experience it. And through this, you actually get to experience someone's perspective, someone's journey, and how it relates to them personally. So if you can't personally relate to it, you can understand another perspective.
100%.
I truly enjoyed your book so much. And I love that you're so dedicated to making children part of the discussion, because so many people argue, like you said, that the boy was 6 years old. He didn't need to know that yet. But we do need to have kids part of the discussion. It is not too much for them to handle, because like you said, they go on social media and they're seeing it. There are 8-year-olds on social media. There are 6-year-olds on social media. It is not just adults. They are learning from how other people are posting and what other people are saying. So giving them the chance to actually be part of the conversation and learn, instead of learning someone else's half thought out views or someone's political views, you're giving them the chance to create their own values. So why was it so important for you to begin engaging our youth in these meaningful and impactful conversations?
Honestly, I feel like we don't need a new world. We need a healed world. And in order to get to that place, we need to make sure that the youth are involved, because they are the next generation that is going to be able to create change. And once we create change, we will get closer to healing. So we can't redo, we can't replay something, we can't fix what was done in the past, but we can surely fix what's going to be done in the future. And it's so important for the youth to be involved, because all schools, part of the mission is that they're going to be active citizens in society, and like without fail. And if you have discussion, well, what does that look like? How can you be active citizens in society when you don't know what's taking place in society? If we're trying to shield kids from some of these social issues, the only way someone can be an active citizen is if they're aware of what's happening, if they can be a part of the conversation, if it can be normalized. So when they get older, it's not a question about someone feeling attacked. It's not a question about someone being angry, but it starts to be a conversation about, what does this change look like? What is realistic? What action steps need to take place for it to occur? And how can we get closer to actually upholding the standards and the foundations and the ideals that America is supposed to be, run on in the first place?
Yes. And I love how you said we don't need a new world. We need to change a healed world, because it is true. You can't change history. You can't rewrite history. What happened, happened. And it is terrible, a lot of what happened. But we have to talk about it honestly. We have to talk about it in an honest way, not from just one perspective, but from both perspectives. Why did people not know that it was wrong? That is a key point, because if you don't understand why people didn't know it was wrong, we don't understand why people still today don't know why it's not wrong. having kids part of these conversations and learning what happened in the past, what is happening now, and what can happen in the future is key in influencing the future of America, but also mental health, because so many people now are growing up in fear and with this idea, but they don't know who they are and what their values are. What are they supposed to believe in? What is there to believe in right now? We are destroying kids' mental health before they have a chance. And it's terrible. And that's why you see the suicide rate so high, especially among young Black men. People don't realize that it starts with being part of the conversation, having a conversation, giving people a chance to understand, to learn, for progress to happen.
So one thing that I wanted to point out is a lot of times I feel like ignorance that happens that people may have is not malicious. A lot of times it comes from their lack of experiences, them not knowing their reality, their facts, their truth being different than someone else's truth, and them interpreting that as a fact. So someone's truth may be different because their experience is different, but it doesn't make it a fact. And that is something that I feel like is so important and why these conversations are necessary. And again, something that was pointed out when I was discussing what Sandra Bullock was discussing with her conversation with her son and Tamika D. Mallory, just pointing out a tweak and how it can be worded so that it's not impacting the victims' mental health, but putting it off on like the actual culprits and identifying that's where the issue lies, is that the conversation is important because to highlight the people who actually have racist views, the people who are purposely trying to keep, certain constructs in place so that certain people do not have equal and fair access. It's important to have these conversations to identify who that is, where that's coming from. And so for the people who are just learning because they're being told or because their environment is different, they can be enlightened about what is happening so that they can identify that and know that that is the issue. And then they can become part of the solution, part of, allyship, part of, advocating, part of speaking up, being part of the voice for, seeking justice, seeking fairness, seeking equality. So I thought that's another extremely important reason why I feel like these conversations are important.
You are 100% correct, because a lot of ignorance is taught. The younger generation, a lot of them are not ignorant because they choose to be. They're on social media, they're seeing the news, they're reading everything. They're not necessarily ignorant because they don't want to learn. It's because of what they're learning. It's because of their environment. I mean, I am proof that I was sheltered my whole life. And some may argue that it's a good thing to be sheltered. Others may argue that it's a terrible thing. And I think there's some line in the middle where your parents want to protect you and don't want you to experience all the bad that's in the world, but making you aware of the bad, why it's there, and what you can do in the future. And that's where change can happen. And that's where conversations start.
Yes, so true.
You are absolutely amazing. I really appreciate you having this conversation with me. So I am so thankful for you for writing this book, for joining me for this conversation today. And where can someone go and buy your book?
They can go to Amazon, they can go to Target, they can go Barnes and Nobles online. You can get it online. You can also go to my publisher's website, mascotbooks.com, or you can go to my website, www.melaninbrown.com. You can also follow Melanin on Instagram at melanin.brown.book.
Candice, you've been absolutely amazing today. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation, for inspiring these conversations, for starting these conversations, for spearheading these conversations, and all the progress that's going to happen because of it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here. This has been an amazing conversation. I feel like a changing conversation, healing conversation, and I appreciate you taking your time out to have me as a guest.